So you are with us today for Wealth and Value Building. Welcome. We, in terms of presenters, Patrick Lensman and Callie Reed are actually doing logistics. So they'll be also helping out with questions in the background, and I will be doing the presentation today. I am Jayne Kielman. My role at Advance Iowa is with business development. So I am out working with businesses throughout the state of Iowa, and one of the services that we have is called Value Builders. So as we go through this presentation, I'll put a little more color to what that looks like and potentially how that might apply to your business, whether you're looking at doing it as the value building system that we offer, or it might be something that if you take the notes and components of what this is, we'll be able to find ways to have application within your business. So today's goals. The first one is just to get you thinking. As we talk about wealth and value building, I'd like you to think about it from two perspectives. Many of you are business owners that are on this webinar, so of course you're going to be thinking about it in regards to what it means to your business. But I also want you to think about it in terms of if you're a buyer, and from that lens. So I'll give you a couple different ideas. We also have lenders and economic developers. So if you think about the businesses that are around you, what this potentially could mean for them. This is really set up to provide a helpful lens so that you can think about value building and, again, how it's going to apply to your business. Why value build? As we go through this, hopefully it makes a little more sense on why this even makes sense. And ideas for building a business that offers you options. That's probably the biggest thing that as we go through today's value building session, think about how it applies to you. And in my words, and as I go out and talk with businesses, I really look at it as it's all about options. So let's consider this. The other thing, is we're adding one more thing in, is really just to stimulate you to take one more step. So as we go through this, it isn't about taking all of the information and being able to apply it, but it's much more about being able to take a small step and take pieces of information and be able to make an application there. So let's think about, are you a person that is saying, I want to free up my schedule so that I can do other things and perhaps have a manager that runs the day in to day out? You could be someone that you're ready to sell. I'm ready to do something different, or I'm at a point that I have decided I want to retire, so it's time. Or maybe it's somebody that's planning a transition, and whether that transition be generational or perhaps looking at key employees or other options of new leadership. Those are all options of why value building will make sense. The thing to take away from all of those scenarios is that you have to have a business that thrives without you. And again, let that one soak in for a minute. I feel like as I'm going out across the state of Iowa and talking to different business owners, it amazes me the number of times that a business owner will talk about their role and responsibilities. And it all comes down to this idea that when you look at value and building value, do you have something that you've created that will thrive without you? Here's a landscape question to think about. So in regards to business ownership, 85% of business owners have their wealth tied up into their business. So the idea about making a transition and what that looks like can be a challenging landscape to consider, especially if value and value builders have not been part of the thought process when thinking about the business. 80% of business owners believe that they'll be successful in their exit, and they're planning the idea that their actions and the implementation of it is what's going to provide for that. But if you look at statistics, only 17% have a written plan. So there tends to be a disconnect between what an owner believes what's going to happen and then potentially really the plans in place to make that happen. One of the biggest things that I see, and the thing that I like to point out to people, because we're all creatures of habit, where when we talk about value building or succession planning or transition, it becomes one of those items that's easy to put off. I'll do it next week. I'll do it a month from now. And 1 month, 2 months becomes a year, becomes 3 or 4 years. And it always surprises me the number of times that we get a call and a business owner is needing to make a transition. And it's usually because one of the dreaded Ds. We talk about death, disability. Hate to pick on daughter-in-laws, but it starts with D. So daughter-in-law or son-in-law, where they get into the mix, and there's different ideas of what business ownership should look at it like at that point. A divorce, a disruption, or discord. So by putting value builder plans in place ahead of time, it's all about options. It allows owners to be able to be faced with one of the dreaded Ds and feel like there's a bit of a safety net or at least a plan in place to address that. The big question a lot of times we get is, we're a university. Our office is based out of the University of Northern Iowa in Cedar Falls. So there's a lot of discussion of why does the state of Iowa even care about this topic, or why is it a focus point of Advance Iowa? Well, as you look on these points, business thrives in succession for years. So it makes sense that Advance Iowa put some time and effort there, because our goal is to keep as many businesses Iowa owned and throughout the communities in Iowa, especially when we look at rural communities where value and succession are closely tied. And if we lose that business, it's much harder to replace the interest, the employment, everything that's wrapped up with that community and having that business in place. However, with some thought and process in place, if we can make those businesses thrive and transition for years, it's a much better situation for all involved. It's relatively a painless process. When I say this, it's that item that a lot of times is on a to-do list, but the process to get it done is always a bit of a challenge. And getting it on the to-do list sometimes can be a bit of a challenge. And when we start to talk about family members and family businesses, it certainly makes for much better holidays when the family gets along and the transition is put together ahead of time versus the discord that can sometimes happen in that process. So that's really why Advance Iowa is focused on this topic and out in the state looking to make connectors with it. So now let's get to work. We're going to consider a couple things. This ends up being one of those items that if you write down anything, these next 3 points are the things that when we do a seminar, we'll ask members to consider, because at the basis of it is, it's really the foundation for which everything else can be built around. So if you were going to sell your business, how much do you want to sell your business for? That's an interesting question, and it'll come or be intertwined into parts of the presentation that are coming up. So jot down, how much do I want the business to sell for? When do you want to be done? That answer is so different for so many different people. And that's the piece with value building that becomes that options item. And done looks different for different people. Sometimes it means an exit from the business. Sometimes, like we talked, it's just a transition that somebody else is running the day-to-day operations. So for you, think about, when do you want to be done, and what does done look like? And the last one is, who do you want to sell to? And I know that sounds like an interesting question. Some people have strong ideas of what that looks like. It might be a family business, so that who am I going to sell to is very already written. It's probably a family member, and it's someone generationally. But for many of our folks across Iowa, even if it was a family business, family members have moved on and maybe aren't looking to come back to the business. So value building becomes important because it may be a group of employees, or it may be having to identify a buyer and deciding what that transition is going to look like. So a little bit of a roadmap. We're going to start with kind of our process and what it looks like. So when we're looking at value building, we're not really looking at, and wealth building, not looking that it's a singular activity with just Advance Iowa, or if you have a CPA or a lawyer that you work with. It's really a team environment. And so who's on that team is really up to you and what the relationships are. But we always like to emphasize that with our process, it's about us doing a lot of the quarterbacking and asking the questions, and then pulling in the other individuals where you have relationships and you've worked with them for years, because there's, as we talked about the lens, a lot of different lenses that start to play out when we talk about tax mitigation or other pieces that are important, not only in the value building piece of the business, but also about the succession planning piece. And so that becomes a piece of why it's necessary. Step 2 is looking at your business for business and personal financial resources. When I talked about the question of what do you want to, or how much do you want to sell the business for, we get calls quite often that the business owner is in their 60s or 70s, and they've made a determination that in this case, 1.25, that's what they believe they need out of the business. But when we start to do due diligence of what it's going to look like to make the actual transition, they maybe are only going to get 750 out of the business. So there becomes a gap there. And at 65 or 70, the runway isn't there to necessarily do a lot to fill the gap. Again, that's the case of where value builders can be so instrumental to figure out what that gap potentially could be and have a long enough runway so that you as a business can make choices along the way that's going to continue to create value. We talk about 5 mistakes or 5 misconceptions that happen often. The first one is people, for whatever reason, don't believe that they're going to live as long as they actually do. A lot of people plan for the idea of 10 or 15 years. Instead, when you look at life expectancy in the United States specifically, it's more like 25 to 30 years beyond. So that also becomes a gap in terms of what that looks like. They're not planning for tax consequences. And so in that process, the tax consequence piece is not considered and becomes an issue in terms of the misconception of what that transition is going to look like. A belief that you're going to get higher returns. It's a little bit like selling your house or something that belongs to you, that emotion that goes with it. We tend to believe the things that we own, we should get a greater return than what we actually do. And that happens a ton in businesses because owners know all of the time the effort, the emotion that has been put into creating the business that they've created. However, a buyer certainly is not looking at it from the same lens. So when you start to look at the types of things that get discounted or the offer that comes in, again, that's where that gap exists and becomes an issue. The other assumption, and that's exactly what I just was talking about, it's the assumption that the business is really worth more than what it is. Many of our buyers or our sellers will start out with the idea that they believe they have a $5 million business. Well, when you get into the logistics of the business and the financials of the business, it may be like a $1 or $2 million business. So again, that's part of the landscape that exists and part of the roadmap of having to navigate and understand value builders. The other piece that becomes interesting is we all have a tendency, for whatever reason, to believe that we will spend less in retirement, when in reality, if you think about travel and the extra time that we have in retirement, it's much more difficult of balancing out the financials than what people initially believe. So closing the gap. The value builder system was created with that exact idea in mind. There is a questionnaire that takes about 13 to 15 minutes to fill out for value builders. Value builders is actually a system for us, and we'll get a little more into that in just a little bit. So one of the pieces of value drivers is focus on cash flow. And the idea is the most valuable companies are ones where the owner is no longer essential, and the idea that with cash flow, it's a diversified client base. And notice I didn't say products, and that comes into it a little bit later too. This is actually looking at diversified client base. A solid management team, and that's something to reflect on too. If you're on this call and you're a business owner, think about the team that you've surrounded yourself with. A solid management team is instrumental in terms of making a transition and of building value. Recurring revenue, that becomes an interesting one, and you'll see that one come back up here in just a few minutes. And systems of operation, the idea of processes in place. Growth strategies. Does your company, are you set up that there's organic ideas and innovation that are happening? Is acquisition part of the process, and thinking about how to continually grow? So we're going to flip the lens here a little bit. Most of our conversation at this point has been set up that you are the business owner and you're looking to build value in your business. This gives you a lens on if you were the buyer and what does a good transition look like for the buyer. And this is where you're going to start to see some synergy that happens between the two. A customer base. So if you're buying a business, you're buying future profits, future revenues. So you want to understand the customer base and who potentially are those customers. The track record of cash flow is very important. Again, a buyer is going to be purchasing what they believe the future revenues are. Intellectual property. So if there's anything tied to the business that's intellectual property, that becomes key to a buyer and potentially what they're looking to purchase the company for. This one for millennials versus an older generation becomes a point of contention. Many of our older generations that started businesses have a business in which it's necessary for them to work 50, 60, 70 hours a week. The new millennial generation isn't looking for that. They are certainly much more about work-life balance. So they're not looking to purchase a job. They're looking to purchase a company in which it's a business and not a job. So now we'll talk a little bit about the business, the value builder system. The thing that's interesting about value builders is it isn't something that we created. It's actually a system that was developed, and the thing that becomes interesting is it's tied to a score. So it is set up that it's a quantifiable relationship, that the score has meaning, and you'll see that on here on the graph, it's pointing out that scores that are 80 or above have a proven record of selling at 71% higher. So the relationship there, scores are 0 to 100, and we'll talk about the value drivers. There's a score that's an overall score, and then there are 8 value drivers that have individual scores. And what basically has been shown is Value Builders has worked with over 10,000 businesses, and over multiple owners, they found that 3.55 times pre-tax profits were realized by those scores, again, that are 80 or above. And the salability of a business is, on an average, offers are 6.1 times higher on pre-tax profit. So it's almost double the average of a business that isn't looking at value builders in the saleability score. So now what makes up that score? Here is an overview, and we'll go through each one individually so you have a sense of what these are. But this is a summary of what each of the value drivers are. And the first one that we're going to start with is financial performance. And financial performance is set up with the idea that the first place that you started, or first reason you started a business, was really for freedom of time, freedom of energy, freedom to do what you wanted. So financial performance works right into the idea that it is a factor and probably the first indicator of whether you feel like your business is moving the right direction. When you look at how you're going to sell that business, again, the saleability ultimately comes back to the financial performance of the business. And an acquisition of your business is going to look at your revenue streams and see profit loss to understand really what type of value your company has initially. They're going to want to know how much profit your company will make in the future. That's what they're buying. And they want to know how reliable those estimates are. So when you look at those components, it's interesting to look at different ways of what a buyer is going to factor in as they make those decisions on how you fit. And Value Builders specifically looks at that and comes up with ways to make your company more valuable. And one quick one is the idea of, do you do your books internally, or is there an audit process outside of the company? Someone that has that other check and balance as part of the process has more value to a buyer, because they know at that point that the books have had someone else's eye on them. Growth potential is the second factor, and probably one of the bigger factors. And think about you as a business owner, and if you're looking to buy a business, the idea of growth potential has kind of a trifecta that goes with this scale. And the idea of scaling a business is, does the business have components that are teachable, valuable, and repeatable? And many businesses find themselves kind of broadening this list. And really, if you look at those three components, they become instrumental in terms of growth potential and the ability to scale your business with the idea of selling less to more people. People have a potential in businesses to think if they offer more items, that might be a better scenario. But really, when you look at growth potential, if you're able to hone in on what you do well and sell to more people, that definitely has more growth possibilities to it. Driver 3 is a little bit just as it sounds, and it is the idea of kind of neutrality. The idea of, when you look at your suppliers, your employees, and your customers, are you overly dependent on any one of those factors? And the goal should be that no one customer makes up 15% of your revenue. And the idea on suppliers, that you could select or move between different suppliers without impacting your business. The hardest piece that I think I find as I'm out and about is that the reliance on one or two key employees is one of the hardest ones for many of my businesses to balance out. So as you think about your business, and as I think about moving around Iowa, many of our businesses are very dependent on one customer. I have many businesses that probably have more like 60, 70, 80% tied up to one particular customer. So the goal of value drivers is to look at that mix and find ways to make that more neutral among all of those factors. The next piece is the valuation teeter-totter. And so the idea with the valuation teeter-totter is that the more cash flow your business needs, the the less it is worth, which sometimes is opposite or a little different than what people think about. The more cash is needed to grow your business, the more cash your business generates, the more value it is worth to your buyer. And it's quite simple when you think about it. When you switch and think about a buyer acquires your business and they have to write 2 checks. They're writing one to you as the owner, and they're writing one that is future funds or working capital. And the idea is that they're coming from the same pocket. So the bigger the check the acquirer needs to write for working capital, the smaller check you'll end up getting. So if you can create a business that cash flow increases, it'll also increase the value of your business. And the nice thing with value builders is it looks at ways to do that. Driver 5 is reoccurring revenue. And this is actually one of my favorite ones to talk about, and one that many businesses underestimate. A financial buyer, again, is buying your future streams of profit. And so therefore, they want to make sure that it's going to be there in the future. So if you can set up a reoccurring revenue model, which right now I feel like we're in kind of an evolution of that. Everything has a subscription or there's a monthly fee to something. And that's really one of the pieces of reoccurring revenue that becomes interesting to explore. And almost every business actually has an avenue for this. Sometimes it's just not very apparent. And the piece with value builders is it will explore your business and lots of different models of what this might look like in your business. Driver 6 is monopoly control. And driver 6 is referring to how differentiated your product or service is. And it's the idea that the more differentiation you can provide, it gives you more control over your pricing. You're not easily replaceable. Higher margins. You're able to capitalize on the idea of higher margins and realize that in profits. More money for marketing. So by being able to differentiate, it allows you kind of a virtuous cycle to be able to create value within that cycle that actually ends up paying off in more value for your business. Driver 7 is customer satisfaction. Again, this one becomes one of those often overlooked options within a business. How often, as a business owner, do you really stop to ask your customers what they think? And in this world of social media, it's amazing when your client or customer is unhappy, how many people find out about that. So the idea with this is having a goal for your customers, not only to be happy, but having the willingness to repurchase, or a bigger component is to refer a friend to you. And so this is set up in value drivers that it actually is quite easy to do. It just is a matter of putting the process in place. And the idea that potentially you would survey your customers every 6 months and be able to do that with some very short questions, with the biggest one being, would you refer me to a friend, or refer us to a friend? And there's a net promoter score that goes with that. So this is showing the idea that you have promoters, you have passives that are neither positive or negative. The ones that really take away from your business are detractors. And as this shows, the detractors is deducted from your net promoter score. So net promoter score in this case would be 20%. And in value drivers, you're keeping track of that and actually working to continue to keep your net promoter score high. And again, as a buyer, you're more apt to purchase a company or want to purchase a company that has customers that are already built in and customers that are happy. The final driver of value, and probably the most important one, is called hub and spoke. And it is the component of that your business relies on you personally. And this would be by far the trap that most owners get trapped into. You've started the business, you know the ins and outs of the business, and all of a sudden, all of the reporting comes back to one person. And if you think from a buyer's perspective, if they take the owner out of the business, what does that mean for the business? If you're focused as a business owner on value drivers, you want to make your position valuable to the extent that there are spokes that handle the day in and day out operations. And the more you can do that, the more value you have created in that business. So what do we do in terms of value builders, and what does that look like? So as I mentioned earlier, value builders system to us is an assessment. And after this webinar, the email addresses that I have, I'll actually send out a link, and you're welcome to go on, take the assessment, and you're going to receive a score anywhere from 0 to 100. If you're someone on this call that's part of a bank or an economic development group, you're certainly welcome to pass this on to another business. The report that gets generated from that, we actually do a follow-up, and we sit down and face-to-face, we'll go through each of those value drivers, which will have individual scores. So they'll tell you what you're doing well and what things have room for improvement. And you'll be amazed as a business owner, if you're able to put that lens on and put those value drivers into focus, how many of those can be changed within your organization or decisions made in the future that create more value for your company. And again, it's about creating value so that you have options. And it may be that you decide to sell your company, or it may be that, again, you have another generation or a key employee. So this assessment will be coming your direction, and will be there in terms of being able to take the actual assessment. Any questions? Feel free to put a question in there if you have it. The other thing I want to make sure that I'm mentioning is, if you're looking ahead on your calendar, we have a webinar once a month. So coming up in September, tax mitigation strategies is scheduled. And on Tuesday, October 23rd, we have some focus on family succession. And you'll see that one of the events that Advance Iowa was particularly excited about is the idea that we have a family business forum breakfast series that will launch in Ankeny, and it launches in September on the 28th. It's set up that there's a September, a November, and January dates, and family businesses are invited to join us. There is information on our website, and each breakfast seminar has a specific topic. Our goal is to create family businesses that transition and to help troubleshoot. So we're looking forward to that piece. I see we do have a question on how long do you have to complete the questionnaire? And I'm assuming from the point of how long is the link valid for. If I'm misinterpreting that, please go ahead and re-ask that question or clarification. That link is good as long as you need it. And so what happens is you will receive the link, and at your convenience can go ahead and take the questionnaire. As soon as you complete it, we both receive a score, and I'll reach back out to you so that we can set up a time. So you don't have a timeline, although some of those things are, when they're fresh in mind, it's always fun to check that one off the box. So that would be an area there. I have a question asking about, what if I have weak areas that need help? Can we help improve the score over a period of time? And that's a great question. And actually, that's what's great about the report, is you will get a sense of all the value drivers that we discussed, which ones are strong and which ones have room for improvement. And we're able to rank those. And each month then we can tailor a program. Either we focus on those that you want to focus on and seem like you can get the most traction on quickly, or we can put them in an order that makes sense to you. So that's a great question, and I'm hoping I'm answering that appropriately. And the question is, do you feel that the service has value when it comes to sell? That is a great question, and really that's what this program's designed for, is the idea, again, whether you're going to sell or whether you're going to transition. It's all about creating value in a company. The nice thing about when you go to sell, we talked about that gap that exists for many clients that don't put that advanced planning in place or haven't been paying attention to value drivers. So all of a sudden it gives you a point of discussion and a point that you already know the key aspects of what a buyer is going to be looking for, and you have addressed those through a runway of history with your company. So you're more apt to get closer to the value or what your perceived value of the company is. Here's a great question. It says, does the current owner take the questionnaire or the family member looking to step in? Here's what I would challenge on that one. I would start with the current owner. And I've had this done a couple different ways. In fact, I just had one recently that was a family company, and they took it together. So when we sat down, we actually looked at their responses, and they had some not arguments, but had discussion, spirited discussion over what some of the responses should have been. And so we discussed what their score, how it would have changed it based off of their answers. So we can play out different scenarios with this as well. So that is kind of a key discussion piece that goes with this, and what makes it valuable for both, for the owner and for potentially the family member that may be looking to step in. Here's a great question too. So hub and spoke, does the hub represent anything, or just the spokes the point? It does. And the hub, when you think about hub and spoke, almost like a bicycle wheel. So the hub is the owner. And if you think about, if all the spokes are coming back to the hub, and the hub needs to make decisions, if the hub has one of the dreaded Ds and isn't able to come back into work the next day, or something dramatically changes, the spokes are left without direction, and the value of the company is not very valuable without the hub being there. So the more a company can be created, and I don't want to say that we're trying to devalue the owner, it really is about changing the role of the owner. So the owner still could be the hub, but not with the same sense of responsibility. It says, do we record these sessions so you can look at them later? Great question. We do. And they are available on our Advance Iowa site. So you can actually go back and rewatch this. Or feel free to reach out to us, and we're glad to talk over any specific questions or provide follow-up details. Any other questions? I think at this point it's looking like there is one more. So it says, any breakfast forums taking place in Alameda County? Right now there is not. In breakfast forums, when I'm addressing that question, that is for our Family Business Forum. So the launch of the Family Business Forum right now, because we knew it was going to be a statewide initiative, all three of those breakfast series are planned in Ankeny. And in part, it became a fairly easy location. It's just off the interstate to get to. We're really looking at this as a pilot program, and potentially how it grows or how it's shaped in the future has a lot of different possibilities. So keep those questions and that information coming our direction. Right now it's been fun to see, because the registrations for the Ankeny Family Business Forum have people coming from throughout the state. And our panelists are representative of throughout the state, different sizes of businesses. So the first group will be on succession planning. That's the September 28th date. And we have a small, medium, and large business that is generational, and they'll be talking about what it looked like for their business. In November, we have a speaker, Chris Vernon, will be talking from Vernon Company. And the idea behind that is what is fair and equal amongst family members is very different. And Chris is able to talk through 116 years of family business experience and a lot of lessons learned in terms of what that looks like. And then in January, it's on next generation leadership, and will be a family business from each of the different business segments. So please spread the word. We're hoping to get as many family businesses there as possible. Any other questions? It looks like at this point we have checked them off. It's 12:42, so as we kind of come to a close, feel free to reach out. And again, you'll get the link to the questionnaire. That's a great place to start. And again, if you're a business, take it just as a baseline and see where you're at. Because the other piece was, can you change your score? That's what it's designed for. The more you change your score upwards, and again, like the results show, businesses that score 80 or above have a higher value in terms of resale rates, or business when they go to sell the business. The whole idea is to drive the score up where we can. So again, thank you for your time. Have a great rest of the week. Enjoy this great weather. Thank you.